Welcome to Between Product and Partnerships, a podcast focused on bringing together product, partnership, and engineering leaders to discuss how to build, support, and scale SaaS ecosystems. This podcast is presented by Pandium, an integration platform for building native integrations.
All right. Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to our podcast, Between Product and Partnerships. If you're checking us out for the first time, we talk about the challenges and what it takes to build integrations and tech partnerships, as well as SaaS platforms. We talk to leaders working on these problems to hear about trends and best practices and how they're navigating the space. So I'm really excited today to have Indy Sen, who is a product marketing manager for ecosystem at Canva. You guys just finished up your conference just a few days ago. So that's exciting. And to kick things off, it'd be great to hear more about you, your background, and how you got into this space.
Thank you for having me, Christina. It's a pleasure to be here. So a little bit about myself. So as you mentioned, I'm at Canva. I'm leading our ecosystem marketing. And I've been at the company for the last year and a half. And it's been an education. You know, I've been in the B2B SaaS space for almost like the last 20 years. And I started my career on the ground floor of the Salesforce AppExchange, Salesforce's enterprise marketplace, which is now a household name, but it really wasn't back then. You know, like seeing what it took to kind of navigate both the dynamics of working with partners, getting a platform out there that can help really partners succeed, as well as getting out of their way in many ways. And I think we can cover some of that stuff. But that's really where I cut my teeth from a marketing standpoint. I then went to Box and MuleSoft respectively to build their platform marketing motion, as well as like lead developer relations and developer marketing. So that, you know, that was great to be in the startup space for a little bit. I then did a tour of duty at Google, where I worked on Google Workspace, working very closely with developers and partners for them to build integrations and apps, and learned a lot about that, you know, working at that scale at which Google operates. And then also, you know, the minute a partner sort of takes off and works with our customers, the usage and the drive, the motion that you can put into together there was really amazing to see at that scale. I took a scenic detour in like the prop tech space for a couple of years after Google. I was at this company that you might have heard of called WeWork. I led global product marketing over there. Different motion, different set of products, but at the same time, really instilled in me the value of like listening to your community and being there for them. So learned a lot of valuable lessons along the way. And then right before joining Canva, I was at a company called Matterport, which is also in the property tech space, helped take it public, led product marketing for them, and kind of reestablished their go-to-market function with the help of like the team. And and after that, took a little bit of a break before joining Canva. And what led me to Canva was really, if I look back on my career, was I think a couple of things, right? Is like the occasion to really, you know, one, embrace a new industry, work for like a cool company, but also I think where I saw Canva, where we are right now, and when I first started was this motion to kind of build a partner and developer community, not necessarily from scratch, but just to strengthen it and have them equip them with like all the tools, both technical and commercial, from a standpoint to make them succeed. And, in some ways, running it back, you know, I'm not saying that the playbook matches all the situations, but it was one of those jobs when I saw the opportunity where I was like, hey, you know, this is the type of stuff that I love doing. And, I'm sure we can talk about it some more. But pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Your background is really cool. I think you probably, sounds like, been in the space as long as I have, like when APIs were a cool new thing. And now it's just like this ubiquitous part of technology.
Exactly.
I'm curious what like landed you at the AppExchange team, like coming out of school, I'm assuming, or like one of your first jobs, like not having, or maybe you do have a programming background, but like sort of how did you end up there? And it sounds like that kickstarted your whole career kind of in this space.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, no, it's a great question. You know, I think sometimes, you know, hindsight's 2020, or you can have an apocryphal sort of like origin story. I think for me, it really started from I think what got me my job at Salesforce was I'm a big spreadsheet nerd. I was really good at Excel when I was a consultant. I worked at this very boutique consulting firm where we were just doing financial modeling almost every day. And I got very close and intimate with Excel, keyboard shortcuts, all that stuff, which, you know, to this day, I still think in spreadsheets in some ways. But that's what landed me my job there. I was a pricing strategist at Salesforce. And that was my first job. And that existed within product marketing. And then very quickly, I just kind of caught the bug of like, you know, working across all facets of marketing. I would say my origin story, if I were to kind of think back on it, was I remember I was in business school, and then I interned at Salesforce. And right around that time, you know, Apple launched the iPhone. And I remember seeing Steve Jobs basically, you know, do his thing, you know, like this very world famous keynote, right? Where we talked about, he was launching 3 products. just kidding. I'm launching this one amazing product that that's going to take the world by storm. And I remember looking at that keynote and listening to it and really being like, I don't know what job that is, right? But to come up with a story like that's at the intersection of like user love, technology, and also like industry leading, like, I don't know what job that is, but that's what I want to do if I can. And I didn't know it back then, but that was product marketing. And so when I had the opportunity to kind of come back to Salesforce full time and I had the opportunity to kind of just really ask for what job I wanted. And at that time, the AppExchange team was hiring and they're like, hey, we need a multifaceted marketer, somebody who's going to be able to nerd out on some of the things, also build models for us. So, fast forward to today, I think that's what brought me on that path. But, it's funny when you look back on your career, what are the things that led you to the path that you are on? Like, it's sometimes you think it's pure dumb luck. Sometimes it's also like, it's luck, but it's also building on the qualities that you have and that you bring to the table and that you're looking to develop.
Yeah, it's an awesome story. And I always like to talk to folks who've been in tech for a number of years, maybe before it was like considered to be the super lucrative, like cool job, and see kind of how they got there, especially if you have a non-technical quote unquote background, but are working in a technical capacity, which doing product marketing is a lot of the time, and even platform marketing, there's this sort of interesting commingling of technology and the commercial side of the business and your users all at one time. So thank you for sharing that. And that kind of leads into our first question, or my second question. You have worked with some of the most like influential, well-known platforms in the SaaS space. When you think back at like starting those ecosystems or being a part of relaunching or rebooting them, how did you know in the early days, and AppExchange might be a great example of this, but how did you know that you were heading like in the right direction and things were resonating in a space that can be a little bit greenfield?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's two things that I would look back on and I'm like, these probably hold true, but in different ways that different companies I've been at. One is looking inward, right? And what I mean by that is like looking at the company and figuring out like, is this company ready for this type of motion? What do we need to help it succeed? And then of course, the second thing is looking outward, right? And thinking like, do we have are we delivering the right product at the right time for this industry? So I think looking inward, I think there are two things that, stand out to me. One is going back to the theme of like, are we ready for this? Is there executive sponsorship to like make this work? And I think looking back at the AppExchange, again, a lot of people will be able to write that history book on the AppExchange, and because, like the model has proven itself, it's gone like gangbusters. But at the time that I was there, and I don't know if many people know this, but like at the very beginning, and it had started back in 2005, if I'm not mistaken, or 2007. It was just getting started around the time I joined. And there were a lot of folks who had worked on it already. But internally, it was known as the crap exchange because it was kind of like a fever dream. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. Like, I think that would not pass today people would be like, oh, wait, what are you talking about? The app exchange is great. But the reason is because I think Salesforce is so sales driven that, having partners come in and build on force.com, which was the enabling technology at the time, and then selling it to customers, it kind of got in the salespeople's way, right? So that there were agency issues that prevented us from being successful. And what we needed to do at the time was really figure out like, okay, how do we take that off the board, right? Like, how do we like make sure that we don't get in the way of this platform being a success? And I'm not saying that was the only thing, but that was a major thing that got in the way, and where a lot of like the previous leadership and folks working on it, like we hadn't quite cracked the code. And then we brought in some amazing people, like this gentleman by the name of Ron Huddleston, who came from like Oracle and had built that motion at Oracle. And like, he was just saying, hey, we got to get out of the way. We got to instill the value that partner success is our success. And I think that to this day, like when he said that, it was just like, like you're like, that's the one thing, as simple as it sounds, was not like a meme internally. And the way we made it a meme was then we made it very clear that like once we had the right commercial models to get partners going and have our direct reps not be feeling threatened by the success of partners. And it came down to a comp model. And I think going back full circle, that's where my spreadsheet skills came in. Like I analyzed a bunch of like S1s and financial filings of like SaaS companies. And we came up with a way of like saying that, hey, like if you're a SaaS company looking to launch, Salesforce's platform is way more cost effective than you building it yourself, right? And like that whole model that even to this day, if I'm not mistaken, Salesforce uses where partners give them 25 to 15% of like their revenue. That was literally numbers I crunched, and like validated on behalf of the team. So I think that took care of the internal stuff. So I think moving forward, when you're looking to build a platform motion, a lot of companies like to declare themselves a platform, right? And I think it's easier now to build developer-facing tools, APIs, all those things, especially if you think about agentic, the agentic era where people can vibe code an app based on like anything that you expose. I think you still have to deal with like that internal kind of handshake, right? Like the alignment and those kind of things. So it's easier said than done. But I think that's still going to be super important for any company that's looking to build a platform motion, is making sure that there's that internal alignment. Now, I also was touching on like the outward stuff, right? Like, are you delivering the right product at the right time for the right community? Again, it's easy to say you have a platform, but you can't just declare yourself a platform, is one thing I've learned, right? Like, I think a lot of times people stumble being like, well, how hard is it to get developers? Just have a meetup, have pizza, I'm sure you've probably heard that, right? And like, it's one of the things where you're like, well, it's not quite that simple. Like you have to make sure that developers are going to be a very skeptical bunch in general, because one, their time is valuable, like non-recurring engineering is a thing, like for them to kind of take a leap of faith on a technology, it's not always going to be straightforward, right? And you have to really show that you understand their problems, you're delivering value. So I think that's the other part of it. And sometimes I've worked on platforms where we didn't necessarily have the right product at the time that we started, or not always, but then we reoriented ourselves to make sure that we could really be there for them and be an authentic sort of like platform partner to that audience. So I know I spend a lot of time on the internal stuff, happy to dive on the external stuff some more, but those are really two ingredients, right? That internal handshake, as well as showing the value externally and trying to nail both those values.
Yeah, it's so interesting to think about like how the philosophy of partnerships as a concept has evolved over time. Like when you look back, like Salesforce was one of the first, like Shopify was one of the first, Intuit was very early, Avalara. There were some of these sort of like what we now consider to be the big fish in the relationship that were adopted this better together idea really, really early. But there are still industries where that is not true. From where we sit, like working on integrations and technology, like we operate heavily in these markets that have this mature concept of ecosystem, which is oftentimes the case because there was the Shopify or the NetSuite or whatever that like put the flag in the sand back in, 2005 and said, we're going to do this. But that's a real philosophical change. Like that sense, it's a change that has taken place slowly over time. Yeah. But I remember just a few years ago, like maybe 5 years ago, when some of the really large historical like black box ERPs came out and said like, oh, we have an API, like whether or not that is true, TBD, but they're at least from a product marketing perspective, like saying, hey, we have historically been a black box. We have not played with partners. We have made it basically impossible for any other technology to touch our technology, to shifting to like, oh man, like NetSuite is eating our lunch, or all these cloud hosted solutions are really getting all the market share. When I heard those announcements, I was like, oh man, like this is like a really strong signal that all of these industries are going to be moving in that direction. And I do, especially in B2B, I stand by that. It's how I bet my whole career on it working in the space, but it's funny to think back on, the days where you were working in these silos and the internal culture around like, hey, actually, we can all make more money if we're not doing the kind of build in-house thing. And it all comes from the top, right? It comes from the executive level all the way down. And to your point, like engineers want to build stuff. So if you say to an engineer, like, we need a sales tax solution, today they would say, let me go find Avalara or any of the other tools that exist. But, 10 years ago, even the impulse, I think, in a lot of companies was let's build it 100%. So getting that same kind of engineer to change their behavior to think about external parties is definitely, it's been a fun evolution to watch. And I think it's bigger than we think about today because everything is integrated, right? Like I don't use a tool for accounting if it's not integrated with my QuickBooks, like full stop. Yeah. It's just ubiquitous. I could talk forever about like how this market has evolved, but it's just interesting. It's interesting to have been through it, I
agree. Yeah. No, it's fascinating. And, like the same emotions, the same quandaries, come back, right? Do I build? Do I buy? Do I partner? Like I think it doesn't matter what the technology is. Like at some point in time, you have to, as a company, take that leap of faith, being like, you know what, I'm better off using this service than doing it myself, right? Or I'm better off building this thing on my own stack and then, but then making it super easy for anybody to connect to it and that kind of thing, right? It's like, I think those conversations, I think are still just as relevant today as they were back then.
100%. And like, I think it takes a lot of confidence in your own product, especially if you're an early stage company, to say like, no, we're actually not going to build that thing. Like, we understand what our value prop either currently is or what we want it to be. And we're like really focused on that. And we're not going to go then build the sales tax module or the whatever it is module. Like we're going to focus on the things that we're really good at. And that can be, I think, again, a little antithetical to like the mindset of product engineering and even like executives at SaaS companies, right? Like we love to build stuff. So it's an interesting thing to follow. And I'm not, it's a hard job from a product marketing perspective to sell.
It is. Yeah. Well, especially for product marketers, I think the hardest part is people love building stuff, but they're not always very good at launching it, right? And don't get me started there. But I think I've worked a lot for like I've worked in the past very closely with like very very technical stakeholders, and they're like, well, we are what is it like a continuous development deployment kind of organization, and you just need to catch up from product marketing. Like we launched this like 6 weeks ago. I was like, I only heard about it yesterday. Like what are you talking about? And on behalf of the team, like that's the tension, right? And especially when and I think it's very important when you're working with like technology products, because developers will eat you alive if your launch is not like up to snuff, or like if you're not doing it in a way that's respectful of like their ability to kind of like adapt or like consume the content. Like consumers even are not that forgiving, but developers, like if they have a shitty experience with you, they will light you up, right? And like until you prove them wrong, right? I think they can be very like as an audience, I found that they can be swayed like many other audiences, but it's very hard. It's very easy to lose trust and harder to gain it back. Not that it's impossible, but yeah. But anyway, I digress.
No, I 100% agree. I think that like the BS meter with engineers is like very highly attuned, and they're going to go try it. Like if you say something works in the way that you market and your team told you and it doesn't, like you only get so many kind of like bites at the apple with that, right? And the perennial problem of like product launching things and marketing knowing or not knowing about them. I mean, that's just, I think in large companies and small companies, I think it's always a challenge. But that kind of leads into another topic that we had discussed, which is how has your approach to marketing, maybe to developers, evolved over time? I mean, you've been doing this as long as I have. And what's the difference? How's it changed?
Marketing to developers, right?
And ecosystem folks generally, but I think developers, a lot of people that listen to this, I think are thinking about that, because everyone, to your point, wants to be the platform. Whether or not you deserve to be the platform, unclear, but people are thinking about it.
Yeah. I think a couple of things, right? Like, and again, we were talking just now, like history repeats itself. Microsoft had made such inroads, like like if you would want to study a good developer platform, look at MSDN from like starting like the 1990s through what they've done. I think like NVIDIA has not secretly, but before NVIDIA became a household name, right? Like they with CUDA and all this stuff, they were just going after developers and making sure that the platform was seen and heard. I think what I've learned is that there's probably, as a marketer especially, you might be sitting on top of like a great brand, but when you're building a developer motion, you have to think about that audience, right? As a marketer, the one thing I learned at Google was we had this tenet in marketing, which was, great marketing stems from knowing your audience and knowing your product, and then kind of connecting the two. And I think ditto for like any kind of developer motion, right? You have to really understand who you're solving problems for, what makes them tick, and then making sure that your solution speaks to them in that way, right? And sometimes, I've been in conversations with literally people, I was joking about like, hey, have a meetup, have a couple of pizzas. This is just developers. They don't care. I was like, well, actually, no, they do, and like, it's not that you need to serve them like sushi or whatever, right? But I do think that you need to show some care and practice in how you're positioning yourselves to them, right? And I think as a marketer, I would say it's two things, right? Like you have to develop over time or come in with a strong point of view. And what that is that one, it's like the verbal identity, and then the visual identity, right? Like I think when I came to MuleSoft, for example, MuleSoft was a company that had literally built its brand on like open source enterprise service bus, right? The ESB, the Mule ESB. To this day, I mean, I could be wrong, but at the time I was there, like that was our biggest competitor, was our own open source solution, right? And I think developers had to understand why on top of that open source solution, we could add value and that we were there to help them. And what that meant was that, at the same time, when MuleSoft was kind of growing like a weed, right? Like in a good way, we had kind of taken our eye off the ball in terms of like the developer sentiment, right? And so we had pivoted very hard to the enterprise, to a point where everything in our visual identity was like a Salesforce clone, right? Like blue sky, white clouds, MuleSoft.
I was there. I remember that.
I want to say though, to MuleSoft's credit, we had like a cutesy mascot way before Salesforce did, right? Like we had Max the Mule, And now I just see Max the Mule clones everywhere. Like I high-fived Max at Dreamforce when I saw him. I don't know if he remembers me. It could be a different Max, but yeah. But what I was going to say is that, I think it's very, very, you have to be very deliberate about how you speak to them and how you show up, right? And I think, for MuleSoft, we didn't reinvent the wheel, but we were very adamant about saying like, hey, we need some kind of different visual flair, identity to speak to developers, right? This white cloud stuff, they're going to see right through it. They're like, we don't even want to touch you because you've sold out, right? You've gone enterprise and all that stuff, right? As opposed to really catering to my needs. And then from a verbal identity, you can't use digital transformation, all these kind of highfalutin words, the words of the day that, I think for all the right reasons, consultancies and enterprise software kind of thought leaders use. But for a developer, it's more like time to deployment, right? Like hello world. What's in it for me as a developer that's going to help me get better at my job? And then, yes, you can definitely lean on all the things that marketing is great at in terms of painting a picture of success, case studies, enablement, those kind of things. But the language is different, right? So for me, the two tenets are really coming in with it's how you show up and how you speak about your solution in a way that's like authentic. And again, you said it, right? Like, and really beautifully, right? Engineers have a great BS meter, right? And so I think the more you can stay grounded on the product truth and then also the tangible results you can, I think that's where the magic comes in, right? Because then if they endorse you, they'll be the first ones to wear your t-shirt, put their sticker on your laptop and be like an evangelist. But I think that's what I've learned is like, you have to be very deliberate in how you show up and in making sure that you don't fall, I think what's worked for you with like the B2B audience or consumer is not necessarily going to work for developers, and just be attuned to that.
Yeah, you're 100% correct. And like, even though, if you're sitting around the lunch table in your office and you've got someone from the business development team and an engineer sitting there, like they're talking about the same stuff, like we're speaking the same like social language, marketing to those two people is so different. Like I keep going to accounting, but like if you're a company that sells accounting software, you're marketing to some size accountant, maybe some specific vertical, but like that person is so different than the engineer at a partner that is going to be interacting with your company on like a deeply technical level. Like the incentives are totally different. The language is different. The demographic is different. And I do find I love working with engineers, and, Pandium, we market to engineers as well. So like it's timely for us personally, but I find it so interesting that like when I talk about marketing to developers and like that BS meter and stuff, I think if folks have not done it before, there's this idea that like it's very dry, like, oh, they want like 1 + 1 = 2, and like they're about solving problems and it's very rigid. But then when you look at like, you go to developer conferences, to your point, there's like mascots, there's t-shirts, there's like all kinds of cartoons, and everything has cute names, and like there's so much, I hate to use the word whimsy almost, like in that ecosystem, the developer ecosystem, that I find it to be like really endearing and fun to operate in. Because like the BS has to not be there, but there is still like fun in it. And I think that drives authenticity, like that helps you seem authentic if you can have a little bit of fun with it and not be so like stodgy. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think there's like, and of all places I learned this at WeWork was like, there's something to be said about having a strong visual identity that appeals to people, right? Where they will sing your praises, or when you welcome them, right? The transactional value you get walking to a WeWork as a member is probably the same as like, I'm an iOS developer, I'm walking WWDC, right? I see, Tim Cook and people parachuting from a plane at a keynote. It's super dorky, but it works, right? Like, I think it's one of those things where, you feel like you're part of a tribe, right? I won't say cult.
No,
but you found your people, right? And I think, and of course, developers, they'll be using AWS, they'll be using like Cursor, or maybe not Cursor. Well, maybe they do, yeah. I'm sure they probably want to augment their ability to be better at what they do. But yeah, they'll be using. In other words, what I'm trying to say is they'll be using multiple tools, right? But anyone that speaks to them in their language or makes that personal connection. That's why brand has such an appeal, right? Like investing in your brand early, or making sure that you protect it, and like, you're like as a marketer, you're like the custodian of that brand, and how you show up, I think matters hugely, right? Because, there's always going to be a launch or something where like you introduce something, it like completely blows up like somebody's deployment, or break changes, those kind of things. But if you can fall back on your feet and show that there's that trust and that transactional value in everything you do, I'm a big believer in that. And I think, I learned that early, like, I mean, Salesforce, before we had all the mascots, very quickly we started building that rapport with partners where like partner success was our success, right? Like that meme that I think our colleague Ron equipped us. I think developer success is our success, right? Like if I think about what we're doing at Canva, we came up with our own visual identity, our own verbal identity, and we have our own satellite events and look and feel, but it's unmistakably Canva, right? And I think it just came out of like Canva Create. People love the brand. Like the people who don't know the brand, we have to educate them on it. But invariably, the people who know the brand love it, right? And I think that's we can ride on those coattails in some ways, but we also have to show up in a very specific way. And I think that matters hugely.
Yeah, it's so fun. I could talk forever about the intersection of like partner marketing and developer marketing. It's cool to think about how those two things come together when, like, again, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, nobody marketed to developers unless you were selling a developer tool. It wasn't this like commingling.
Yeah.
So moving on, because I could talk forever about developer marketing.
Same.
Maybe we'll do another one. I'm curious, because marketing attribution with partnerships generally, whether they're technology partnerships, affiliate, like resellers, a little bit easier, but is always challenging. What are your thoughts on being able to get revenue attribution from ecosystem marketing generally? And again, that can be like reseller, affiliate, influencer. If you've got a link where you're going directly to buy something, it's a little bit easier. But yeah, what are your thoughts and what would you recommend that folks try to implement early on?
Yeah, I mean, I think so the answer is like, I think it depends on what motion you're trying to prop up, right? Like, I think if you're, when I started at Canva, and even like if I go back to the early days of like our Box API, right? Like the proof of concept, right? Or like the first order thing you needed to prove was that people are using these technologies, right? So we were looking at adoption, API usage, and tracking, and those kind of things. And then that gets you from like it being like a side hustle to like an actual initiative, right? Mm-hmm. But once you have that initiative, yeah, invariably, like especially developer marketing is a cost center just like other marketing as well, and also like a developer motion where you don't yet have monetization, right? Like that's also is going to be a cost center, right? So you have to show the value to the business. And I think there are a couple of ways in which you can do that depending on the life cycle you're at, right? Like I think one is, so again, with adoption, yes, you can look at monthly actives, you can look at like API users going up. I think what you could do is like, use that data and kind of jujitsu it to kind of figure out like, do some analysis on like, retention, right? Like are people who use 5 apps a day more likely to renew, like, come like, renewal time and those kind of things, right? Like you can do that math. Like at Salesforce, we did it early where I think we saw that there was a hit list of like, 10 apps where if a customer had any, like 1 or 2 of those apps in the 10, they were, I think I forget the stat, right? But like way more likely to renew than like, any other customer, right? So I think that's how you can show like some value, like stickiness and retention is a good way to show the value of like what you're doing in the ecosystem. And then, of course, if your bread and butter is selling those platform products, right? Like MuleSoft, obviously, it could take us, I think, about 7 to 8 months to land a deal, right? But when we did, those deals were easily high 6-figure deals, right? And so, and then, and one of those, and if you have a product where, in the case of MuleSoft, once you're in, super hard to like rip and replace, right? Like when you're in, right? And if you're doing a good job, you're bringing like a transformational aspect. I know I said I wouldn't use that word, but here I am.
Okay.
Yeah, you can, it's very hard for you to kind of like be replaced, right?
Yep.
So, I think where I'm going with that from an attribution standpoint is obviously, the attribution to like, was this conducive to winning that opportunity? So obviously if you're MuleSoft, that is the thing, right? So obviously that impacts your win rate. But, when you're a solution where, without going into too many details, like a recent example like Canva is that, where we have our APIs that our customers, our enterprise customers have access to and can build on top of. And, I would say qualitatively, that's becoming more and more part of the conversations, right? So as a marketer, what we try to do, and I work with our partnerships team, we're monitoring like on Gong, like how many conversations have the words API integration. And it's not necessarily going to be, you have to go back and validate that. But I think that's where then I look at our sales team when they have their win reports, if they do have shout outs on like, our solutions engineer who worked on this deal and built a custom solution was incremental, was not incremental, but pivotal in us getting this deal, right? Those are the kind of signals that we look for. So, I think you can look at like usage, you can look at like, deal close, the ability to kind of like impact a deal. And then of course, if you do have a monetization, metric, right? Like with Salesforce, once we found the right way, like that 15, 25% revenue that percentage net revenue that we would get from partners, that all added up to a forecast and like delivery on that stuff, right? So I think the last piece of it is like, can you show like a clean path to like what that revenue forecast and impact can be on the business? And I think at Salesforce, I'm not as close to the business now, right? But I remember staying close to like some of the folks I worked with in that, it was that exponential growth, right? We went from 0 to 8 million to 15 million to 44 million in the space of 4 years of like revenue that directly brought in via like our ISV team. And I think it's, completely, if I look back at like some financial reports, this is from a couple of years ago, but I think it's still probably platform overall is bigger than Sales Cloud itself at Salesforce, right? So, and it could have changed, right? But again, this goes to show that once you do build that waterfall kind of like aspect and you can forecast it, then that's great. So I think depending on what type of motion you're trying to instill, like I think there's, like we said, adoption, there's, win rates. Those are easy, not easy, but probably the first things you want to look at is like the impact of the thing. But then if you have the monetization humming, then obviously you can start building like a revenue kind of like forecast around it. Apple, I don't know if they necessarily have a forecast for like the App Store, but it's very clear when the money comes in, how much you're making, right? So I think, again, it goes back to what you can measure, right? Like that's what you can manage. And as a marketer, it's sometimes tough to seek those data points, connect them. But when you do, then you can totally fly by wire based on that.
I love the idea or the plan of using Gong or another kind of like meeting recording software to try to aggregate when these things are mentioned, because I think, it's hard to even get sales folks to put in Salesforce or in their CRM. Like somebody asks for an integration to XYZ tools, it can be really difficult to report. But, when folks bring it up on their own, that's kind of a surefire way. Whether the deal closes or not, it's a good way also to think about, like, from the partnership perspective, who should they be targeting? What types of tools are people thinking should be used with your product? But yeah, it's definitely, once you have that, like you're paying for, either taking haircuts on licenses or people are paying for API requests, like that line is very straight to revenue.
Yeah.
It's a little more challenging early on. I think we got time for one more question, and then maybe I'll let you get back to your day. This is a selfish one for me. What do you think the next generation of ecosystems will look like? Where are we going?
That's a good question. I think at the end of the day, these technologies are changing so fast, right? Like everybody's talking about the agentic era and like how people can now even, I think the term vibe code, right? They can vibe code apps and those kind of things. And, I think to a certain extent, some it's true, right? But I think there's still going to be important to focus on what that transactional value you provide as a vendor is going to be. Yes, you might have abstracted so many things in the development cycle, and maybe your target is going to be a smaller mass, right, of developers, because, maybe through technology evolutions, like there's some roles, some jobs will be impacted. Like I think, but there's still going to be a human element that you're going to have to, focus on. And I think as a marketer, maybe that's my bias, right? But I think that's where connecting with your audience is going to matter more deeply. So I think from an ecosystem standpoint, maybe the overall surface area like is going to be smaller, but I think the impact that you're going to have, right? If you're the right business, the right tool at the right time for the right developer, like everybody now, like, we joke about vibe coding, but what's true about that is that it's democratizing, the ability to kind of build things that are going to add value to your business or your personal life or so on, right? So I think there's still a super target rich opportunity in my mind to build a strong ecosystem motion in what you're doing, because at the end of the day, you do not want to be that vendor that doesn't, right? Like I think, like whether the tools change and like, maybe the economic opportunity, I don't know if it's necessarily smaller, but it's going to be maybe harder to kind of nail, right? Because right now, all I'm seeing on the AI side is I'm seeing a lot of cool use cases and proofs of concepts, right? But it hasn't quite, and it is hitting the mainstream in some ways, but maybe that's just because we're in this bubble here in like Silicon Valley or in our tech kind of industry. I don't think it's really hit home for like, people outside of our industry yet, right? But so I would say for an ecosystem, it's all about, still investing in making that connection in my mind with like your target audience, because you might spend less time with them. Your tools, again, like I said, are abstracting a lot of things, but you still have to enable people and make sure that you are top of mind when they want to develop things, right? And I think There's going to be a plethora of like tools that are going to say that are going to make claims around you being able to do this, that. I think the technology itself is not going to be a differentiator very soon, right? Like we're already seeing so many, ChatGPT clones and wrappers, right? I think that human aspect of marketing, that transactional value that you create, that handshake you have, that implicit bond that you can create as a marketer, I think is going to be meaningful and one area to invest in. Yeah, no doubt, it's going to be crazy, right? Like how some of these ecosystem strategies will evolve, but yeah, I'll go back to the theme of just making sure that you don't lose that human connection that you create on behalf of your company and your brand.
I 1,000% agree. I was talking to someone this morning about like how code is becoming commoditized to a certain extent. And I don't think that doesn't mean engineers are going away at all. I think, but like writing like mediocre code that you could like copy and paste off of Stack Overflow is now becoming automated. So like, cool, great. And most engineers don't want to do that anyway. But I think that to your point, is going to mean that companies really need to have like that laser focus either on like the technology that they do that is really, really, really outstanding, and or the harder thing I think is that human connection and like building trust with the technology and bringing your experience as a human being to building technology, marketing technology, helping solve complex problems. It's going to take a long time for, I think, a robot to be able to emulate that. And that's going to be the moat, right? Unless you're like, Bloomberg or something and you have like a massive amount of proprietary data, most companies are not going to have that type of like closed loop system. So the other thing that, the Skynet can't emulate is humans and like our experience and tying kind of all those threads together. And I do think that's a really important part of marketing, including to developers, because, they all want to work with humans too, despite what they might say about Cursor. This has been super fun. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. It was a great conversation. Great way to kick off the morning. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, maybe we'll do another one where we could just like wax poetic about the history of the Salesforce AppExchange, because I love this stuff. Really appreciate it. Yeah, really appreciate you taking the time, sharing your knowledge. For the folks that are listening, watching at home, Sen from Canva, really excited to have had you here. You can catch more of our content about products, partnerships, and integrations and all that good stuff at pandium.com or our YouTube channel. Andy, anything you want to plug while we have all the humans?
I was going to say, like, I don't know when this is airing, but yeah, I'm running a marathon, the London Marathon, fundraising for it. So if there's time, I'll pop in the link. I think fundraising is going off for the next 30 days. If this was valuable, would love your support. It's raising research for cancer research. So, good cause. And I'll promise I'll try and hit those 26.2 miles. I'll do my best at the very least. And yeah, that's it. Yeah. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure, Christina.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed our content, subscribe to our channel and give us a thumbs up. For more content on tech partnerships, integrations, and APIs, check out our articles, ebooks, and other resources in the description.